heavy breather on the line, or maybe a hang-up phone call. A cold letter mailed to taunt police or a victim's family. A mean-spirited email meant to inflict pain on its recipient. What do all of these things have in common? They're all various modes of communication connected to shocking crimes going back decades. I'm Mike Morford, host of the podcast Killer Communications, and in every episode, I tell the story of a case involving some form of sinister contact, whether it's to a victim, their family, police, or the press. For the senders of these communications, it's bold and brazen. For the recipients, it can be frightening or downright terrifying. And you won't believe just how often it happens. Check out Killer Communications right now everywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
You're listening to
Campus Killings,
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
and
Citizen Detective.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, Megan, and hello, listeners. Today's case will be a little bit different from our usual coverage. While we usually discuss a subject who is either the victim of a murder or the perpetrator, today we'll be looking at a whole new angle, the bystander. Author and professor Amy Butcher wrote Visiting Hours, a memoir of friendship and murder, and she wrote this in 2015, around 6 years after her best friend, Kevin Schaefer, murdered his ex-girlfriend while they were students at Gettysburg College. While Amy wasn't directly affected, the murder still completely upended her life, and the memoir captures a unique perspective about the ripple effect that homicides can cause. For our listeners who might be interested in reading Amy's memoir, we'll have a link to it in our show notes.
I am very interested as well in reading this memoir, and this is a very interesting angle, Amy.
I don't think it's one that we've covered here or on Women in Crime.
No, not at all. Yeah, this is great. And I know you like reading memoirs as well, so I imagine that we can share this book.
Yes. But before we get to Amy's story, let's take a look at the place where it all happened, Gettysburg College. Founded in 1832 by abolitionist theologian Samuel Simon Schumacher, Gettysburg College began as a Lutheran institution. The college is most famous for being witness to the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, when the Union and Confederate armies met for the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. At that time, the college became a hospital for the wounded, and when classes resumed in the fall of 1863, students and faculty walked from the campus to the town center to hear Abraham Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address. And today, students will still make this walk, as every year during freshman orientation, all first-year students walk the same trail from campus, through the historic battlefields, and to the National Cemetery as a reminder of the college's history.
Wow, I like that.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And while Gettysburg College is most famous today for its majors in the American Civil War, the institution is a nationally ranked liberal arts college with over 40 majors. And it's a selective school, only accepting around 2,000 students annually. And it also boasts a very high rate of employment post-graduation, with around 98% of their graduates working in their field within a year of finishing their degree. But none of these attractive qualities are what made Amy Butcher decide to go there. Amy admits in her book that the only reason that she ended up at Gettysburg was because they accepted her, and the college reminded her of home. Amy grew up only 3 hours away from the campus in Telford, which is a small town outside of Philadelphia. She was the middle child and the only girl in a tight-knit middle-class family where her father worked as a chemist and her mother taught high school French. In her words, she lived a sheltered, perfect childhood where her parents were very much in love and she and her brothers were close. The college's appeal for Amy was that despite its historical significance and tourism, it was a small town that was very similar to the one that she grew up in, and she was attracted to the familiarity of the location.
Well, that's fine. That seems like a reason to go to school. I get it.
Yep. However, the first week of college in 2005, Amy felt like a fish out of water. Her freshman roommates were not like her at all, and although she tried to hang out with them the first few days, nothing really clicked, and she says she felt pretty lonely. That is until she participated in the annual history walk that all freshmen took during their orientation week. And this is where she would end up standing next to and becoming friends with a young man named Kevin Schaefer. As they walked with the 700 other freshmen through the battlefield to the National Cemetery, Amy learned that Kevin had chosen Gettysburg College because of the history. He was a huge Civil War buff, and he wanted to be living in a place that matters.
Oh.
As they walked, Kevin was able to tell Amy about the historical significance of the battlefield and what had happened there in 1863. Amy recalls that Kevin came across as quietly mature for an 18-year-old, and the more they talked on the walk, the more they realized how much they had in common. Kevin had also grown up in a small Pennsylvania town, and like Amy, he had lived a sheltered, good childhood, and he was very close to his parents. The only real difference seemed to be that Kevin was an only child, while again, Amy had two brothers. As their first semester progressed, Amy and Kevin hung out all the time. While there was never a romantic connection between the two, they understood each other's particular brand of weird, as Amy would say, and they just felt comfortable together. By the winter, they had joined a larger group made up of mostly upperclassmen who lived in off-campus housing. So by their second semester, Amy recalls that while she and Kevin still hung out all the time, it did tend to be in group settings. And as the semesters progressed, their friend group became incredibly tight, though Amy explains that she and Kevin still shared a special bond because out of this group, they were the only two who didn't have emotional trauma in their home life. Most of their friends either came from divorced families, were escaping oppressive religious upbringings, or just didn't get along with their parents. And this sometimes made it hard for Amy to relate to them. And since she and Kevin shared their close-knit family backgrounds, it was something that they could always understand about each other. But despite Kevin coming from a loving family with no trauma that Amy knew of, she got a disturbing email while she was studying abroad in a remote French town during her junior year. One of their mutual friends contacted her to say that Kevin was unwell and that he had abruptly left campus to seek treatment.
Did he have a history of, when you say unwell and seek treatment, is this medical or mental health treatment?
This would end up being a mental health issue that he was dealing with. But remember, this was 2008, and there weren't apps like WhatsApp or Messenger, so she couldn't call or text him, and she didn't have an international cell phone.
Right, okay.
So aside from being able to send Kevin a get-well card from France, that actually ended up arriving long after she'd already returned to the States, there wasn't really much she could do from abroad. And their friend also didn't specify what kind of unwell Kevin was, only that he had left school to be treated. Amy asked to be kept in the loop, but it wasn't until she returned to Gettysburg that she realized just how unwell Kevin was. Amy had discovered that Kevin had tried to take his own life.
Oh.
One night, he had stolen all of the electronics from his housemates' rooms and plugged them in around the rim of his bathtub and then filled the bathtub to the brim. His housemates found him just as he was entering the tub, and they were able to stop him.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Kevin agreed to wait with the housemates until EMS arrived, and he was then transported to Reading Hospital's psych unit, where he spent the next week on suicide watch. He returned to class about a week later, and in the winter of 2009, when Amy returned to Gettysburg after her semester abroad, she recalls semi-avoiding Kevin the first few weeks after she got back. While she understood that he had been hurting mentally and was shocked that he had tried to die by suicide, she wasn't really sure how to broach the topic with him. She says that she simply didn't have the vocabulary to feel like she was asking the right questions. And also, she says his mental health felt just too personal, even for their close friendship. So when she finally did invite him to her new apartment to hang out, she recalls avoiding the topic of his mental health completely and just focusing on trying to get him to have some fun.
What was he like then? Is she going to describe how he seemed, or things back to normal, or no?
It seems like things were kind of back to normal.
Okay.
Other than this, maybe this weirdness, tension that she felt, like not addressing the elephant in the room.
Okay.
The two went ghost hunting on the battlefield. They got coffee downtown. They hung out to drink and smoke pot at their friends' apartments. They would go to dive bars and listen to local bands. And they continued just doing all the things that college students typically do. And things seemed to be going well for Kevin during this time. So much so that senior year, he started a relationship with a sophomore named Emily Silverstein. And Amy was ecstatic for Kevin.
Was Amy also in a relationship at the time?
Actually, she was. She was in a long-term relationship. So it seems like she was hoping that Kevin would be also. Although the two were always platonic friends, I guess she just felt that since he was going through a tough time, maybe it would be good for him to be in a relationship.
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, you're happy for your friends too when they're having a hard time, but they make a connection with someone. So
Yes.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But while Emily came to some of the friend group parties, Amy recalls not really knowing Kevin's new girlfriend very well. At 19, Emily was younger than the rest of the group. And a Pennsylvania law said that anyone under the age of 21 could not even sit at a table in a bar if someone else at the table had ordered alcohol. So this would make it difficult for Emily to go out with Kevin's friends.
They were all 21. Got it.
They were all of age, yep.
Yep.
But while Amy didn't know Emily very well, she knew enough to feel that she was a good fit for Kevin. So who was Emily? Emily was a sweet, kind young woman who was an activist in many humanitarian causes. She was originally from Monmouth County, New Jersey. That's where I'm from.
Yes.
And she was studying anthropology at Gettysburg. She was involved in several major extracurricular activities, including Amnesty International, Feed the Children, and Students for a Democratic Society. In the 2 years that she had been at Gettysburg, she already had created 2 programs, one called Tent City to bring awareness to homelessness, and the other one called Funk the War, which was an anti-war demonstration about the U.S. occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. She was also the co-president and a resident of Peace House. So Gettysburg College has a special housing program called College Houses, which are essentially student-run homes that specialize in particular academic themes or interests.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the particular mission at Peace House was to build awareness for humanitarian issues in an effort to bring about world peace.
She's quite a standout already, huh?
Yes. And while this was a bit different than Kevin's major in history and his love of indie music, he once confided in Amy that he felt that he could truly be himself and open up with Emily in ways that he had not been able to before. And Amy attested that Kevin did seem to be much more open than he used to be.
Amy, how long after his suicide attempt did the two start dating about?
It was only about a few months.
Okay, I see. All right.
So this was good for him. Again, it was a time where he felt a bit hopeless, and then Emily kind of helped him get through a tough time, it seems. But despite this seeming like a good match to Amy and her friend group, in the early morning hours of April 9th, 2009, Kevin would do the unthinkable.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
As Amy recalls, it was the Thursday before Easter weekend, April 8th. Around sunset, she called Kevin to ask if he wanted to join the friend group for a night out. When Kevin picked up the phone, Amy said that he sounded lethargic and distant. And although she recognized that he didn't sound like himself, she knew he was studying at the library, so she thought he was maybe just a bit distracted.
Sure.
She remembers telling him to lighten up and come have some fun. And eventually he agreed, joining Amy and 5 other friends at the Blue Parrot Bistro downtown. At the bar, the group talked about how abstractly terrifying it was that they'd all be graduating in a month and that they didn't know what their lives would be like after college.
Oh, I didn't realize they were a month away from graduation.
They were.
Oh, wow.
And if you recall, the recession of 2008 had already taken hold, so the job market was a bit uneasy at this point.
Daunting, I think, yeah.
Yes. So most of their friends who had graduated the year prior were still either unemployed and had no choice but to move back in with their parents, or they were sharing one-bedroom apartments with strangers because the only jobs they could get were low-paying minimum wage jobs.
Yeah, I do recall.
With no job offers on the table and unsure of what he wanted to do with his life, Kevin told Amy that he planned himself a road trip of the whole United States as a post-graduation gift to himself. Amy, too, had post-graduation plans, but hers were more professional. She had been accepted to a graduate program at a university in Iowa that would also provide her with full-time employment teaching undergraduates. But she kept this news to herself as they shared some food at the bistro. She feared that she would make Kevin feel bad, so instead of telling him that her job offer was the actual reason why the friends had all gone out that evening, she joked with Kevin about the roadside attractions that he might see on his tour.
Oh.
As their friends trickled out over the next few hours, Amy and Kevin were left alone by the time the restaurant closed. Even though Amy's apartment was only a block away, she admits to being quite drunk that night, so Kevin offered to walk her home. As they stood in front of her stoop, she decided to tell him the whole reason that they had gone out that night, and it was to celebrate her new job. She said she felt bad flaunting it in his face in front of everyone and didn't want her good news to discourage him. But instead of acting upset, Kevin told her he was very happy for her and proud too, referring to her as the budding professor.
Oh, okay. I was wondering what his reaction was going to be as well.
At a loss for what to say to make Kevin feel better about his situation, Amy recalls making a silly joke about his road trip. They parted ways. Amy went inside, brushed her teeth, and went to sleep. What she didn't know was that when she woke up around 4 a.m. to get a glass of water, Kevin was stabbing Emily Silverstein to death only 2 streets away.
What happened here? Oh my goodness.
The timeline of Emily's murder isn't clear, but I'll piece this out as best I can from the information that was available. To start, there are 2 accounts of what happens next. The first is that Kevin went right home after leaving Amy at her doorstep. But there's another account that suggests that Kevin went to another friend's home and hung out there for a little bit before returning home. Either way, what we do know is around 3 a.m., he was at the house that he shared with 3 other students. But from what records seem to indicate, he was alone at the time. So his roommates were either out or traveling.
Okay, yeah.
He allegedly then called Emily, though they had broken up about 2 weeks before.
Oh, okay. Well, you held that information, but I gotcha.
Purposely?
Yes, of course. I was wondering what happened. Okay.
But whatever he said on the call made her come to his home in the middle of the night. So I don't know if she was looking to reconcile or if he asked her to just come talk, whatever it was.
Or if she had concerns about his mental health because he could have been in a state.
When she arrived, he'd later claimed that she said they needed to take a break. Now, whether this meant from the relationship or talking to one another is not clear, because again, they did break up. So I get the sense that either they broke up and they were on and off, or they broke up but they were still talking as friends. So it seems like she may have said that whatever they were still doing, they should stop.
Yeah.
He then went to the knife block in the kitchen and tried to slash his wrist. And when Emily realized what he was intending to do, she interfered and tried to grab the knife away from him.
Oh, I see.
According to interviews he later did with police and several psychologists, he claimed that he didn't remember what happened next, only that he attacked Emily, stabbing her in the neck and the chest. Her autopsy would show that he stabbed her 27 times and he also strangled her. Some reports say that he panicked after he realized what he had done, and he tried to revive her by tying clothes around her wounds to stop the bleeding and putting her in a bathtub. Now get this, in his altered mental state, he believed that the bathtub would at least contain the blood and that EMTs might be able to put it back in.
Oh boy. Well, that's got to tell you something about his state of mind at the time of the crime, too.
Reports also stated that Kevin sat by her body for around 20 to 40 minutes before calling Emily's best friend, a woman named Claire, who lived up the street, and he admitted to her what he had done. Claire immediately came to his house, and when she saw Emily in the bathtub, she told him he had to turn himself in. And he agreed to do so, but first he wanted to call his parents to say goodbye.
Oh.
While he confessed to his parents, Claire sat beside him and called 911.
Okay.
Once he'd hung up with his parents, Kevin went out to the home's front porch to wait for the police. Kevin was arrested without incident around 6 a.m. on April 9th, while Amy slept soundly only a few blocks away. Gettysburg College circulated an email to students immediately following Kevin's arrest, and it just cited that there had been a stabbing on campus, but no names were released. Amy woke up to this email thinking that it must have been a drunken fraternity party incident or maybe an interrupted burglary. Never did she think it would have anything to do with her or anyone that she knew. She packed her car and began the 3-hour drive to her parents' home, and this was what her plans were initially. But as she pulled down Kevin's street, she saw the yellow caution tape and a slew of police clustered around the mailbox in front of Kevin's house. She called Kevin, but he didn't pick up. Hoping he was just in class, she continued driving, but about an hour later, Kevin hadn't called her back. So she then called a mutual friend to ask about what was going on. This friend reported that Kevin never showed up to class and nobody knew where he was. By the time Amy was back home for Good Friday, Kevin's photo was plastered all over the evening news. In the space of 12 hours, Kevin Schaefer had gone from best friend to murderer.
We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors. She must have been, I always hear these stories and imagine driving down the street and seeing your friend or family member's house taped off, or, the cars, the police cars out front, the fear that must happen.
Yeah, and then especially when he doesn't pick up the phone.
Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, I can't imagine that feeling. I hope I never have to.
In her memoir, Amy remembers the immediate aftermath as a mental jumble, where her disbelief in Kevin's ability to have committed murder juxtaposed against her desire to make sure he was okay. She wrote him a letter while he awaited his first hearing in jail. And this would be the first of many letters that the two would send back and forth over the next several years.
Why did Amy say that she started sending him letters? Was this to figure out what happened, to be a supportive friend, all of the above?
That's a good question, because while there was a small part of her brain that still identified Kevin as her best friend, and she wanted to make sure that he knew that he was supported, there was a much larger part of her that was hoping for some explanation. How could he have done something so awful and violent? How could he have acted so normal at dinner? How could he have walked her home because he only wanted to make sure she got home safely and then brutally murder Emily only a few hours later? But Amy could never bring herself to ask on paper, and Kevin never wrote anything pertaining to the murder at all in his responses. Amy kind of recalls the whole subject of being an unspoken taboo between them, kind of like a don't ask, don't tell situation. But she says it ate at her. How could he have killed Emily? And the unknowing unraveled Amy. If her best friend Kevin, who was kind and thoughtful, who had taught her about the Civil War and walked her home from a bar because she was drunk and he was worried about her safety, now if he could become a murderer, what was stopping another man from doing what Kevin had done? While Kevin would take a plea deal and be sentenced to 26 to 53 years in a state prison, his lack of explanation for why he killed Emily made Amy's mental health unravel over the course of the next 2 years. About 6 months after Kevin's arrest, Amy says she had a mistrust of all men, and she abruptly ended her long-term relationship with her college boyfriend, and says that she decided to never date again. She also blamed herself. She had been the last person to hang out with Kevin before he committed the murder. In her book, she explains, quote, "If I had known, I would have stopped it. I would have taken him to another bar. I would have taken him to another city. I would have dragged him to Maryland, the middle of Virginia. There would be no time for him to meet with Emily." She experienced repeat nightmares about the murder, and as she tried to teach classes and work on her master's in Iowa, a deep depression took over her. She recalls not being able to leave the couch on most days, sitting far away from the windows of her apartment so that nobody could see her, and living on dry cereal while she mindlessly watched cartoons.
Wow. Do you think this is survivor's guilt?
It sounds like it. It does, right?
It sounds like, I mean, I know it might be slightly different, but this certainly sounds like it could be survivor's guilt to me. I understand why she was depressed and why she couldn't move past this, because it would eat at me too, knowing what, even knowing if someone had mental health issues, what happened on that one night? They were with me. It would bother me. It would eat at me too. So I get it, but it sounds like clear survivor's guilt to me.
And along with that, the fact that she feels like she narrowly missed being victimized herself.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yep. Amy says she isolated herself from her family and her old college friends. She even missed some of their weddings and other major life events. Her lowest point was on a night when a drunk college boy mistook her apartment complex for his dorm and began pounding on her door at 3 a.m., begging someone to let him in. She says she thought he was coming to murder her.
Ugh.
Even after the police came and explained that he was just drunk and that everyone was safe, Amy hid in her bathroom for several nights, still in fear that what happened to Emily would happen to her. She finally sought treatment for her depression and was diagnosed by 2 different psychiatrists with PTSD and repressed trauma. She began extensive talk therapy, and she also began taking an antidepressant.
Mm-hmm.
But while these helped Amy become more functional again, she still struggled to find closure to Kevin's atrocious act. In all their letters to one another, Emily's murder remained an unspoken taboo subject, but Amy needed to know how it happened. She felt that it was the only true way to get her PTSD under control.
Right.
And if Kevin wasn't going to tell her, there was only one other way that she could find out.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
In 2011, Amy made an open public records request to the Adams County District Attorney's Office. She wanted to get all of the available public records from Kevin's case. And a thick packet arrived on her doorstep just a few weeks later, and it included everything from Emily's autopsy report to Kevin's psych evaluations.
Oh, wow. His psych evaluations were in there.
Mhm.
That's public record? Okay.
I was surprised by that. I was thinking
Yeah.
maybe it would be redacted, but even if it was, you still know who it is because of the case.
I
so-
want to know what this is going to reveal. Okay.
Well, Amy began to build a picture. According to the records, after Kevin's suicide attempt in the fall of 2008, he had been prescribed an antidepressant. But around 2 weeks before Emily's murder, Kevin had abruptly stopped taking his medication.
Okay.
He alleged in his psych interview that he didn't like the side effects of the meds, so after picking up a refill, he left the bottle unopened in his desk drawer. And we know how dangerous it is for people to abruptly stop taking medication.
It certainly is.
And the problem, for those of you who don't know, the problem with going cold turkey on medications, especially given the dosage he was prescribed, that comes with mind-altering side effects that include mania, suicidal ideations, severe depression, and even psychosis.
Mm.
All 3 of his psychiatric evaluations agreed that due to his abrupt cessation of the meds, Kevin had been in a severely altered mental state the night he murdered Emily Silverstein, and that he had been unable to deduce right from wrong. In Kevin's final statement at his sentencing, he was quoted as saying, quote, "I didn't want to hurt her." And he also referenced the fact that he was only trying to harm himself.
Which may have been the case initially. I would believe that initially.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But the nature of Emily's murder was violent and personal. Her autopsy showed signs of a struggle, that she tried to fight Kevin off, but he still again strangled her and stabbed her 27 times.
Yeah. Horrible.
And unfortunately for Amy, finding out the why only added to her personal guilt. If only she'd asked Kevin how he'd been feeling after his suicide attempt, perhaps he would have had an open conversation. If only she'd been more aware of his mental state their senior year. If only she kept him out later instead of letting him walk her home that night. If only she'd done 1,000 things differently, maybe Emily would still be alive.
Ugh.
We know a lot of survivors feel, like you said, survivor's guilt,
Yeah.
but there's nothing she did that could have prevented this.
Oh, gosh, no, absolutely not. Just living with that burden, it just seems so hard.
In 2012, Amy visited Kevin at his maximum security prison in Albion, New York. Aside from his parents, she was his only visitor in his 3 years of incarceration. And she really hoped that in some way the visit would finally provide the closure that she still hadn't found. But like the years of letters, it all still felt incomplete, and she could not bring herself to ask Kevin anything about the murder, nor could she admit to him that she had read through his whole case behind his back. About 6 months after their meeting, Amy finally realized that no amount of letters sent in hopes of him providing some explanation would ever make the murder go away. And no explanation would ever be enough to wipe it from her memory.
Sure.
She really just had to accept that she had been best friends with a man who murdered, and there was really nothing she could do to change that. By 2013, she had stopped sending letters to Kevin, and instead she worked through her trauma by writing personal essays that eventually became the memoir Visiting Hours. In her epilogue, Amy is honest that she still experiences flashbacks and nightmares, and that Kevin murdering Emily unequivocally changed the trajectory of her life and her view of the world. But she also admits that she can choose to move on, and she has tried, though April 9th of 2009 has left its mark on her forever. In Emily's honor, Amy dedicates a portion of all of her book's profits towards the Stop Dating Violence Project, which is sponsored by the Emily Fund. If our listeners would like to know more about Emily Silverstein or would like to support some of her causes, her family has a foundation in her memory at emilyfund.org. There is also a bench dedicated to Emily's memory in the middle of Gettysburg College, and the school does an annual Emily Silverstein Day of Service to commemorate her charitable spirit. Kevin Schaefer remains incarcerated in Albion's maximum security prison with parole eligibility in 2036. And he'll be just shy of 50 if he gets granted parole.
Okay.
I don't suspect that he will actually be granted parole given the violent nature of the crime, but we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it.
I don't know. I mean, he was young. Yeah, no, it's a very violent crime, but it will have been, 26 years?
Yeah, it'll be about 26 years when he goes up for parole.
It's definitely a possibility that he could get parole.
Also, I think it depends what he's been doing while he's incarcerated.
Well, that's what I mean. It's been 26 years. Has he been a model inmate during that time? And I wonder how her family feels about it as well. Because, parole also can be influenced by family members and whether they go and whether they are totally opposed to the parole process or even the idea of it, or whether they've had some type of restoration. So they've met with the offender, they've made amends. So I think they can also play a role. So I think it would be hard to say at this point whether or not he'll receive parole.
Just something I want to point out before we head out today. When I teach victimology, I teach about the idea of vicarious fear, which is that, secondary victimization or indirect victimization, because this case illustrates, again, the indirect effects. So Amy's whole life was upended by this event. And as we see, she struggled a lot to try to come to terms with what happened. So when there's a victimization, there are such a ripple effect. And there are so many people that are victimized and affected. And this idea of vicarious fear, many students on that campus probably went on to live similarly to Amy in constant fear that something like this would happen to them.
That's interesting. I don't teach vicarious fear. I don't even know if I've heard that before as part of victimology. So that just means like students or anyone who has some type of relation to a person or kind of some relation to an event will experience a fear because of it.
Yes, and I've actually heard it described. It doesn't even have to be someone that you directly know. So let's say in your area you heard of a sexual assault. Right. And now that if you live in fear, that could be vicarious fear, even if it's a stranger who was victimized.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I think that I need to focus a little bit more on victimology in my classes. This is a good reminder.
But you talk about secondary victimization a bit?
I do talk about that a little bit. Yes. You know what it is? I think also I haven't taught criminology per se in a little bit. So once I return to that, I will definitely revisit victimology and this idea of vicarious fear, which I had not heard of. So thank you for that, Amy.
This is a good case study for, the indirect victims of crime. Because also stories like this, they remind us that while true crime tends to focus on the victim and the perpetrator, murder can and does have a dark, lasting impact on many people in its periphery. So it's hard for us to measure how much of an effect these stories have on, people surrounding it.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. It was a very interesting case. And I'm glad that you chose something a little bit different than what we usually do. And I certainly learned something. I hope the audience did as well.
Yes. And again, Amy Butcher, she's a wonderful writer. She currently teaches writing at Denison College, so I would highly suggest her memoir. Again, you can find the link in our show notes. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Campus Killings.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Megan Sachs and Dr. Amy Schlossberg, with research and writing by Abigail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/campuskillings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.